Good morning. I'm Pastor Kim Risedorph, and we're here to worship God. The thing about worship is God doesn't need our worship. Our worship doesn't change God or make God more loving or present. Worship changes us. I know worship changes me. I leave a different person with more hope, resilience, and awareness of the loveliness of community. And today, if you're visiting for the first time, thank you for joining us in this community. It takes a little extra courage and effort to visit a new community, so thank you. Thank you for being here. I know I love being in worship, and I love the fellowship time afterwards. It's a time where you get to meet people or catch up with people. There's coffee, there's bagels, and the chance to follow up on many of the opportunities to serve others with love, to celebrate community, or to grow in faith. So if you've never gone to the fellowship time in the fellowship hall off here to the left as you leave, maybe today's the day to try it. And if you want someone to walk over with you, I'll be outside greeting people. I'll walk over with you. And I bet a lot of other people here will look for an opportunity to walk over with folks new to this community. Speaking of new, we're starting a new sermon series today. And during this sermon series, we'll be inviting you to try new things. Today, we invite you to tell the stories that matter. Now, the thing about invitations is they're requests. You can't force someone to participate or say yes to an invitation. Throughout this sermon series, we'll be looking at all the ways God gently invites us to be at one with God. Just like God invites us, we can also invite God into our lives and into our awareness. And that's what we do at the start of worship when we bring in the light of Christ. It's our opportunity to prepare our hearts and our minds for worship. I invite you during this time to inhale, to exhale, to allow yourself to be fully present, intending to be alert, aware, curious about what God is saying to you this morning. Now is the time to worship. Let us begin in moments of silence and let the light come into our lives, our sanctuary, and our world. You know that little thing we did with the slides and the hymn where it went back and forth and it was hard to follow? That's just something we like to do to make sure you're awake and alert and paying attention. And it's kind of like calisthenics for worship time. But now is the time to worship. And in worship, we'll be reading from the book of Ruth. I first have to tell you some important trivia about the book of Ruth. It's filled with irony, wordplay, and puns. And who doesn't love a good pun? Just to test drive that idea, first we're going to read just the first two sentences of our reading today and look at that to see how carefully crafted this story is, and then we'll read all 6 verses. But these are the first 2 lines from the opening chapter of chapter 1.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah.
You'll notice that some names were repeated. When an author does that, they want us to pay attention. It's drilled into us in these opening 2 sentences that this family is from Bethlehem. Mentioned twice, so we're supposed to pay attention to that. And original hearers in the ancient world would get the irony right away. Bethlehem is a home of bread, and there's a famine in the house of bread. Irony, right? And just in case we missed that, he or she, the author, drills a little bit deeper and says these people were Ephrathites. Ephratah is the ancient name for Bethlehem, and it literally means to be fruitful. Well, there was no fruit in the house of bread. There was famine. And in case we missed that, the characters are given names that have meaning. Like Malone is one of the sons who was supposed to be fruitful, but both he and his brother died before they had any offspring. Malone is a wordplay on something that we read about earlier in the Bible. Right before the Exodus, all these diseases were part of a plague that hit Egypt. And Malone is a wordplay on that word for various diseases. And Chilion, the other son who was not fruitful, even though he was from Bethlehem, his name literally means to perish. So the author sets us up to get a sense of irony about what is happening. This is not supposed to happen, the author says. This isn't the world we expected. And now the story continues. Why don't we read the whole thing again?
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem of Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were Malone and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Those took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Malone and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. Then she started to return to Bethlehem with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. Here ends the reading.
Thank you. I know it's kind of a grim start. There is death and famine, but the story doesn't end here. Spoiler alert, by the time we get to the end of chapter 4, there'll be a barley harvest and the arrival of a new child. But that's in another couple weeks. We're going to spend the next 5 weeks reading different excerpts from the book of Ruth. And you're invited to read this book at home. Only 4 chapters. You could do that. There are no known negative side effects to reading the Bible in between Sundays and reading it at home. It's a book that invites us to consider that God appears in unexpected places. And it's a book that asks us to examine our assumptions about other people. It is the perfect book for us at this time. And so I look forward to exploring the whole book of Ruth with you. Please join me in a moment of prayer. Oh God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts, and the living of this day be pleasing in your sight. You who created all, loves all, redeems all, and comforts all. Amen. So we're reading from the book of Ruth, and we already can check the box that we know that this book was carefully crafted, lots of meaning, lots of layers, especially in place names and people's names. So there's one more name we have to look at a little bit more carefully to get the rather radical message of Ruth, and that's Moab. When the early Jewish community first heard this story, that word Moab is like when a villain comes on the scene and everyone goes, boo, hiss, that sort of thing. Every faithful Jew knows that there is nothing to like or respect about the Moab people. There's lots of layers to that. Just like stereotypes and caricatures that build over time, there's usually a history, and people might not even know part of that history. They just join in the culture of not liking the Moabites. Has to do, there are lots of layers. I'll just do a real quick version of bullet points of why that is so. The origin of the Moabite people, they're offspring of a man named Lot. And it's kind of questionable about how he had children. His daughters got him drunk. They slept with him. They got pregnant. And so there is a lot of moral superiority among the Jewish community about how the Moabites got started. But I just have to say, our matriarchs and patriarchs in the faith don't have a lot of moral high ground to stand on if you read the stories that brought us into existence as a faith community. So there was that. But more important, in more recent history, when the children of Israel were on a journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, there were times of conflict with the Moabites. And when the people of Israel finally landed in the Promised Land, they did that which was not pleasing to the Lord. They had a habit of doing this. There are two things that don't please the Lord, and I don't have to do this part of the sermon. If you're in Disciple, or if you've ever taken Disciple Bible study, what are the things that displease God? Reassure me here. Worshiping other gods, not worshiping the one true God. What are the... Pardon? Yes, disobedience, specifically not caring for those of need in your community. Those are the two things that displease God. And when the children, although they had landed in the Promised Land, displeased God, other nations would come and take them over. And guess who was king for 18 years? A Moabite. Talk about rubbing salt in the wound. So this tension, this animosity between the Jewish people and the Moabites had been building over time. And so, in the book of Ruth, who's the heroine? Ruth, a Moabite. God will be found and heard in unexpected places. This book also asks us to examine our assumptions about ourselves and other people and our relationship together. I think it's highly probable that this story of Ruth was written as a counterpoint to messages you find in nearby Bible books, Ezra and Nehemiah. Those books emphasize that a good Jew should have no contact with foreigners. In fact, if you married a foreigner, best to divorce them and just go back to your homeland after a time of exile, to go back to your homeland. So Ruth offers us a radically different understanding of who's in and who's out. What I love about the Bible is, once again, it raises a topic that is still relevant in our lives and world today. The book of Ruth reminds us that God is found in everyone, even those that we or our culture have gotten used to dismissing or disdaining. And along those lines, there was a news item this week that asked us to look squarely at that question. And the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church sent us a letter on Friday night and asked that each pastor read that letter out loud in church. So this is Sermon 2.0 that incorporates that letter. I'm going to get it and read it to you. Again, this was written by our Council of Bishops, a worldwide body of the Worldwide United Methodist Church. And this is the letter from our leaders in the church. I never thought I'd have to read something like this. It's kind of, when I practiced it, I cried. But I'm grateful that our bishops wrote this to us. We are appalled by the offensive, disgusting words attributed to President Donald Trump, who is said to have referred to immigrants from African countries and Haiti and the countries themselves in an insulting and derogative manner. According to various media accounts, President Trump made the remarks during a White House discussion with lawmakers on immigration. As reported, President Trump's words were not only offensive and harmful, they are racist. We call upon all Christians, especially United Methodists, to condemn this characterization and further call for President Trump to apologize. As United Methodists, we cherish our brothers and sisters from all parts of the world, and we believe that God loves all creation, regardless of where they live or where they come from. As leaders of our global United Methodist Church, We are sickened by such uncouth language from the leader of a nation that was founded by immigrants and serves as a beacon to the world's huddled masses longing to be free. Thousands of our clergy, laity, and other highly skilled, productive citizens are from places President Trump has defamed with his comments. The fact that he also insists that the United States should consider more immigrants from Europe and Asia demonstrates the racist character of his comments. This is a direct contradiction of God's love for all. Further, these comments on the eve of celebrating Martin Luther King Day belies Dr. King's witness and the United States' ongoing battle against racism. We just celebrated the birth of Jesus Christ, whose parents during his infancy had to flee to Africa to escape from the wrath of King Herod. Millions of immigrants across the globe are running away from such despicable and life-threatening events. Hence, we have the Christian duty to be supportive of them as they flee political, cultural, and social dangers in their native homes. We will not stand by and allow our brothers and sisters to be maligned in such a crude manner. We call on all United Methodists, all people of faith, and the political leadership of the United States to speak up and speak against such demeaning and racist comments. Christ reminds us that it is by love they will know we are Christians. Let's demonstrate the love for all of God's people by saying no to racism, no to discrimination, and no to bigotry. And I guess I would add, we can say yes to love. We can do that. And our next song reminds us that we are not alone, that God is beside us. That song is a song of hope. We are not alone. God is with us. We're part of a community of faith. And the book of Ruth is also a book of hope, that we will find God in unexpected places. And we can live with that awareness and give thanks ahead of time that that is true. The idea that God appears in unexpected places is a theme that runs throughout the Bible. Elijah looked for God in a whirlwind, found God in a still small voice. Moses found God in a burning bush, of all things. Samuel and Joseph, both Joseph in the Old Testament and Joseph in the New Testament, found God in their dreams. And Mary Magdalene looked for Christ in the tomb, but found Christ standing behind her and alongside her. One of the enduring themes of the Bible is we are not alone, and we will find the divine presence here with us, often in unexpected places, even the church. I say that as a way of introduction to what I'm going to read you next. I had planned to read excerpts from one of my favorite of Martin Luther King's writings, Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I make a point of rereading that every year around this time, and I imagine that someone's calling me. No. I imagine that that letter was written to me, because the letter was written when King was in the Birmingham jail after leading a protest there, and the white clergy in that town wrote a letter criticizing King, saying that this wasn't the right time for such a demonstration, they should wait. And they criticized his approaches, his tactics. And King wrote this long, bracing letter to the white clergy and included his disappointment in the church. I want to read you just a bit of that. This is a sermon of letters. I'll read you just a bit of it, because I think it speaks to us in our time as well. There was a time when the church was very powerful, in the time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven, called to obey God rather than man. Small in number, they were big in commitment. By their effort and example, they brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiator contests. Things might be different now. So often, the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is the arch defender of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silence, and sometimes even their sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning. So we have an opportunity to reclaim this image of church that turns to God for guidance, that knows God shows up in unexpected places. I don't know where in your life this morning you need the assurance that God shows up in unexpected places, where you carry pain or hurt or grief, where you feel caught in a whirlwind. I do know that being in church allows us to gather as a community and turn our attention towards God and to listen to the Holy Spirit, so that together we are not just something, we are the thermostat that changes what is accepted and true in the culture around us. Yes, we have work to do, but we have God with us to do that work. And there are numerous ways to do it. I just want to mention one that is part of our community now. About a year ago, a group formed that is called, they call themselves Embracing Diversity. And last February, they, with folks from Asbury and from the larger Livermore community, had a rally for love, a nonpartisan, family-friendly gathering of about 500 people down in front of the Bankhead Theater in Livermore. There were speakers, there were music, there was the opportunity to recognize we are a diverse nation coming from all different places and all different religions. And we will have the second Rally for Love on Sunday, February 11th in the afternoon. If you feel nudged to be a part of that, to contribute to that in some way, the next planning meeting is actually this afternoon, 12:30 in the fireside room. And Ann Call is here. Ann, can you just stand up? If you see Ann around, she'd be another person that could, and Ellen Pete I saw here too, two people that will be around and helping to lead that effort. There are many more, but I would encourage you to think about, is that the way for you to become a thermostat Christian who radiates the warmth of God's love in this world? Another way we seek to do that is by praying for peace in our world. And we have this ritual of again and again taking light from the Christ candle and lighting a peace candle. We do it every week, because every week we need the reminder the church is called to follow the Prince of Peace and to do what is necessary, to sacrifice what is necessary to bring peace into our world.